A medium-sized cruise ship costs from $100 billion to build, and that's not even one of the largest. The biggest ships can cost up to $2 billion. But here's the unbelievable part. Even if that ship is sitting at the port without passengers, just floating on the water, it burns through 80,000 every single day, thanks to fuel, crew salaries, and maintenance costs. In other words, owning a cruise ship is practically like throwing your money into the ocean every day, unless you manage it correctly. Today, let's take a look at how a cruise ship empire actually works, from construction and financing to crew management and onboard profits, where every single dollar comes from and where it goes. In the end, you'll see that the real profit doesn't start when you sell the ticket, but after the passenger steps on board. An entrepreneur wanting to enter the cruise business faces two choices. The first is ordering a new ship. These are typically built at major shipyards in Italy, Germany, or Finland, taking 2 to 3 years to construct and allowing you to fully customize the design to your liking. The second option is buying a used, second-hand vessel. This path is significantly cheaper. A 15 to 20-year-old ship can be acquired for 10 to 15% of its original value, roughly 100 to 150 million. But there's a trap here. An older ship's fuel efficiency is much lower, whereas modern ships burn 20 to 30% less fuel, thanks to newer engine technologies. In other words, a ship bought cheaply can end up costing far more in the long run due to higher operational expenses. It's the industry's classic, buy cheap, pay dear dilemma. Few people know that cruise ships are almost never bought entirely with cash. As an industry standard, companies rely on a system called export credit financing. The government of the country building the ship, such as Italy or France, provides a low-interest loan to back the deal, since doing so secures jobs for its own local shipbuilding industry. These loans typically cover up to 80% of the ship's total value, while the remaining 20% is paid out of the owner's own capital. The repayment period usually spans 10 to 12 years, and annual interest payments alone can reach 30 to 50 million for a large vessel. This means that even before your ship picks up its very first passenger, you are already locked into a debt burden that will last for decades. Now the real expenses begin, and they keep adding up even if the ship stays in port. Fuel is the single largest expense. A giant cruise ship can burn 250 to 300 tons of fuel a day, costing 100 to 150,000 daily while underway. Crew costs are equally significant. An average ship employs 1,000 to 1,500 staff, from the captain to the kitchen line cooks, amounting to several $1 million in monthly payroll. Port fees can't be overlooked either. Every time a vessel docks, it must pay charges that can reach $100,000 to $200,000 for a single stop at major ports. Food supplies are another substantial line item. Feeding 4,000 passengers and 1,500 crew members over 7 days means throwing down the $50,000 to $80,000 in grocery expenses every day. When you add it all up, the daily cost for an average cruise ship, just to exist, ranges between $250,000 and $400,000, whether there are passengers on board or not. One of the cruise industry's best kept secrets is crew economics. Many workers, particularly frontline service staff like waiters and cabin stewards, are recruited from developing nations and work for relatively low base salaries, because the bulk of their income comes from passenger tips. This setup slashes payroll costs for the company, but it comes with immense responsibility. Service quality directly drives customer satisfaction, which in turn fuels repeat bookings. Then there's the flag of convenience system. Most cruise ships don't fly US or European flags. Instead, they register under nations like Panama or the Bahamas, where labor laws and tax burdens are vastly more lenient. While this remains one of the industry's most heavily criticized practices, economically it saves shipowners tens of millions of dollars. So where does the revenue actually come from? At first glance, the answer seems obvious: ticket sales. An average cabin for a 7-day cruise goes for 800 to 2,000 $, while luxury suites can reach up to 10,000. Just like airlines, the cruise industry relies heavily on dynamic pricing. The exact same cabin can be priced differently based on occupancy, season, or even the time of day it's booked. If a ship carries 4,000 passengers, ticket revenue for a single voyage can hit $3 million to $6 million. Sounds impressive, right? But here's the reality. Most of that revenue is spoken for before the ship even sets sail. Travel agency commissions, 10 to 15%, fuel, crew wages, and food supplies quickly erode that figure. There's a famous saying within the industry: ticket sales pay to keep the lights on, but they don't drive the profit. Now let's get to the industry's biggest secret. A cruise line's real profit doesn't come from ticket sales. It comes from the money passengers spend after they step on board. Casinos, spas, drink packages, shore excursions, photo packages, and Wi-Fi passes are all sold separately, boasting incredibly high profit margins. For instance, onboard casino margins can far outpace land-based casinos because there's zero competition. Trapped in the middle of the ocean, passengers have nowhere else to go. Statistically, the average passenger spends an additional $500 to $1,500 during a trip over and above their ticket price. This extra spending, known in the trade as onboard revenue, can account for up to 50% of a cruise line's total profit. Some major players have even developed their own private islands. Incorporated directly into Caribbean itineraries, these islands operate as fully owned revenue hubs where every single item, from beach loungers to cocktails, must be bought directly from the cruise line. As a result, ticket prices are often deliberately kept low as a loss leader to lure passengers on board, while the actual money-making engine kicks into gear once they're at sea. Filling a cruise ship is an expensive endeavor in its own right. The industry spends 8 to 12% of its annual revenue on marketing, television ads, partnerships with travel agencies, and digital ad campaigns. A ship's break-even point, the minimum occupancy needed just to cover operational costs, typically sits between 60 and 70%. Anything below that threshold means running at a loss. This is precisely why the industry relies so heavily on last-minute discounts. Selling an empty cabin, even at a price that doesn't cover its base cost, is better than sailing empty. A vacant cabin brings in zero revenue, whereas a discounted cabin at least generates some onboard spending. The cruise business is highly seasonal. During the summer months, Mediterranean and Alaskan itineraries hit record occupancy, while the Caribbean becomes the top pick in the winter. However, when a ship switches from one season to the next, it has to make a low-capacity or heavily discounted transit voyage known as a repositioning cruise, such as crossing the Atlantic Ocean to get from the Mediterranean to the Caribbean. These sailings typically sell at low occupancy because most passengers prefer visiting specific destinations rather than spending extended time at sea. During these transits, the ship still carries its full operational costs while its revenue potential plummets, making it the industry's recurring hidden loss period, several times a year. Now let's move on to the risks. The first risk is fuel price volatility. Since fuel accounts for 15 to 20% of overall operational expenses, sharp swings in oil prices can wipe out profit margins overnight. To mitigate this risk, many cruise lines turn to a financial tool called fuel hedging, entering into contracts to lock in future fuel prices in advance. However, this strategy comes with its own gamble. If market prices drop lower than anticipated, the company remains locked into paying above market rates for its fuel. The second, far more catastrophic risk is black swan events, unpredictable global crisis. During the 2020 pandemic, the entire cruise industry came to a near total standstill. Ships sat idle at ports for months, yet expenses kept rolling in: crew wages, technical maintenance, and port fees. Major operators bled millions of dollars every single day, bringing some to the brink of bankruptcy and forcing them to raise billions in extra capital just to survive. The third risk is environmental regulations. In recent years, numerous countries and ports have clamped down on cruise ship carbon emissions and wastewater discharge. Complying with these stricter rules requires retrofitting vessels with advanced filtration systems and exhaust gas cleaning units known as scrubbers, adding an extra $5 million to $10 million in capital investment per ship. As these regulations continue to tighten, compliance costs will only go up. The fourth risk is technical maintenance. Every 2 to 3 years, a ship must be pulled into a repair facility known as a dry dock. This process takes several weeks and costs anywhere between $10 million and $50 million, depending on the size of the vessel and the scale of the refurbishments. During this time, the ship generates zero revenue, yet full crew wages and other fixed expenses continue unabated. Many owners fail to plan for this expense properly, leading straight into a cash flow crisis. Everything you've heard so far might sound terrifying for a single ship owner. But the industry's real secret lies in scale. Major cruise lines typically operate fleets of 10 to 20 ships, which creates several massive advantages purchasing power. By buying everything from fuel to food in bulk, their unit costs are vastly lower than those of smaller independent operators. Risk diversification: even if one ship is stuck in dry dock, the other 19 continue generating steady revenue. Brand power: a well-known, established brand can command higher ticket prices and consistently achieve higher occupancy rates than an unknown player because the trust is already built. That's why the cruise industry is one of the most consolidated sectors in the world. A handful of giant corporations control the vast majority of the market, leaving virtually no room for small independent players. So, is owning a cruise ship worth it? The answer depends almost entirely on scale. For a small entrepreneur with a single ship, the answer is that it's far too risky. One pandemic, one fuel crisis, or one dry dock delay can collapse the entire business. High break-even thresholds, heavy debt burdens, and a lack of scale make this model extremely fragile. However, for companies operating large fleets, risk diversification, economies of scale, strong onboard revenue streams, and brand loyalty turn this into an extraordinarily profitable model. One capable of generating billions of dollars in annual profit. I'd rate single ship ownership a 3 out of 10, but at a large fleet level, that rating easily jumps to a 7 out of 10. What do you think? Would you drop $1 billion on a cruise ship, or would you opt for a safer investment? Let me know in the comments!